Hello and welcome to my media profile project. If the cute fuzzy animal staring at you hasn't clued you in, the country I'll be analyzing in this presentation is Australia. First, I'll be going over a general overview of features such as population and governing structures, then I'll provide an overview of Australian media. Australia is the 7th largest country in the world. Comparatively, it's slightly smaller than the United States. It hosts a population of over 23 million and utilizes English as its primary language. Australia and the United States share a historical commonality in that the Aboriginal population of Australia was severely reduced through state-orchestrated genocide, in this case by Britain. It's estimated that the Aboriginal population was over 1 million. It's now about 116,000. Colonies were sent from Britain to Australia starting in 1788. What makes these colonies historically unique is that they were composed of mostly convicts. Most convicts were exiled from Britain for non-violent property crimes and enjoyed more freedom than regular prisoners. There is actually a wine brand that uses this history as a marketing scheme. It's called 19 Crimes. Each bottle profiles a convict with a little blurb about their life. My sister introduced me to this wine, which I must say is quite tasty. Who can say no to facts and fermentation? What started with convict colonies has become a sophisticated government. Australia's government is a federation of 6 states that compose one nation. It was formed in 1901. Like the US, it has 3 branches: the legislative, what they call parliament, the executive, and the judiciary. Sometimes Australia is referred to as the Commonwealth of Australia. This is because the Queen of England is still considered part of Australia's parliament, but she's represented by someone called the Governor-General. The Queen must be proud of her Commonwealth for a number of reasons, one including their GDP. Australia has the 20th largest GDP at purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity uses the ability to purchase everyday items such as a measure, rather than relying on dollar amounts alone as typical GDP does. Over 75% of Australia's workforce is employed in the service sector. Industry jobs take second place at around 21%. This is another similarity with the United States. They're both service sector economies. Service sector jobs do what they sound like they do. They provide services. This is in contrast to industry jobs which create tangible products you can hold. Examples of service sector occupations are servers, teachers, and you guessed it, media producers. So how does media fare in Australia? Australia has a higher press freedom ranking than the United States among many other countries. Out of 180 countries, Australia is ranked 19th. The United States, on the other hand, is ranked 43rd. This is particularly interesting because unlike the United States, Australia doesn't have an explicit protection of the press in their constitution. However, their High Court has held that an implied freedom of political communication exists as an indispensable part of the system of representative and responsible government created by the Constitution. It operates as a freedom from government restraint, rather than a right conferred directly on individuals. One might believe that all is well in Australian media if they stopped there, but dive a bit deeper and we start to see an awfully familiar picture. Freedom of press doesn't mean as much if the press is monopolized. Here's a spoiler alert. In Australia, media isn't monopolized, but it's terribly concentrated. BBC writes that 2 companies, Murdoch-owned News Corp Australia and Fairfax Media, account for the bulk of newspaper sales. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation runs national and local public radio and TV, while national commercial TV is dominated by 3 free-to-air networks. However, Australia does have laws in place to curtail some of this concentration. One law is called the 2 out of 3 law, and the other is called the Reach Rule. The 2 out of 3 law prevents companies from holding a controlling interest in more than 2 firms that operate television broadcasting, radio broadcasting, or newspaper publishing in the same region, while the Reach Rule stops commercial TV networks from broadcasting to more than 75% of Australians. These 2 rules are currently on the chopping block, as many are calling them outdated. The Shadow Minister for Communications, Michelle Rowland, has spoken out against this, saying that Australia's level of media ownership concentration is already one of the highest in the world, and that repealing the 2 out of 3 rule would reduce the diversity of voices across the media landscape. This raises 2 common issues we've discussed in class. 1, the concentration of media, and 2, the disproportionate coverage that's a result of it. News Corp owns 70% of newspapers in Australia. That surely has poor implications for possible competitors. Some positive changes are visible when considering Australian media from its inception to now. Press coverage and broadcast media programming reflected a Eurocentric outlook at first. However, later in the 20th century, we saw an increased presence of Aboriginal people in the media and greater coverage of the Asia-Pacific region. So, it seems media focus may be shifting in a positive direction. But, with the 2 previous laws mentioned on the chopping block, I think a change will take a negative direction. The reversal of those 2 laws will likely invite more of the large international companies into Australia, which we already know causes bias in coverage. But I've heard the residents of Australia are pretty tough people, so maybe they can handle these big companies. And if they can't, they've got some good backups. Kangaroos. In fact, they have too many of them. There are almost 2 kangaroos for each person in Australia. Perhaps these kangaroos will help to keep those companies hopping along.